Beloved, stop what you are doing right now and listen carefully, because what is about to reach your ears in the next few moments was not meant for everyone. It was meant for you, not the person sitting beside you, not the thousands scrolling past this message without pausing. You, the one who felt something shift the moment this began. The one whose heart is already beating a little differently, because somewhere, deep beneath the noise of your daily life, something ancient and awake inside you. Recognize this voice before your mind had time to explain it. You did not find this message. This message found you. And there is a difference so profound between those two things that heaven itself pauses to make sure you understand it. Finding something is an accident. Being found is a divine appointment. And God does not make appointments without purpose. He does not schedule encounters without intention. He does not allow a chosen one to arrive at a crossroads like this one without a reason that is bigger than anything you can currently see with your natural eyes. You have been walking through a season that has felt at times like you were invisible, like your prayers were rising and dissolving before they reached the ceiling, like the promises spoken over your life in quieter, brighter moments were slowly becoming memories you were afraid to keep believing in. You have smiled when you needed to. You have kept moving when everything inside you wanted to stop. And in the middle of all of that, you have carried something rare and heavy and holy, a knowing that you could not fully articulate, a pull towards something greater that refused to leave you alone, no matter how loud the world got around you. That knowing is not confusion. That pull is not restlessness. It is the voice of God, and He is trying to speak to you right now. The book of Jeremiah, chapter 1, verse 5, carries words that were written thousands of years ago and are landing on your spirit with fresh fire in this very moment. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you. Read that again slowly. Before you were formed, He knew you. Before your parents held you, before your name was spoken aloud in any room, before the first breath ever filled your lungs, God had already seen you, chosen you, and set you apart for an assignment that only you can carry. That is not poetry. That is your reality. And so you have to ask yourself honestly, if God knew you before you were born, if He appointed you before the foundation of your days, why have you been living as though this life is happening to you rather than through you? Why have you been shrinking back from the calling pressing against your chest every single morning? Why have you been silencing the voice that wakes you at 3 in the morning with impressions too specific to be random and too persistent to be ignored? Heaven is not trying to decorate your life with a few nice blessings and send you on your way. Heaven is trying to activate something in you that will shake the ground beneath your feet and shift the atmosphere in every room you walk into. The genius wave that researchers have identified in the human brain, that deep theta frequency that exists in children and in those the world calls geniuses, that is not an accident of biology. That is a God-designed signal woven into the very architecture of your mind, because you were created to receive, to perceive, and to carry divine intelligence into the earth. But right now, in this moment, before we go any further, heaven is asking something very simple of you. Not perfection, not a grand gesture, just acknowledgement. Just a declaration that you are here, that you are listening, and that you refuse to let this moment pass over you like every other moment you were too distracted or too afraid to fully receive. If you can feel this message moving in your chest right now, if something in you is awake and saying yes, even when your mouth has not yet opened, then I want you to do something right now. Type 111 in the comments below. 111. That number carries a frequency of awakening, of new beginnings, of divine alignment. It is your way of saying to heaven, I am here, I am listening, and I am ready. Let the angels record your declaration. Let the cloud of witnesses see that you did not scroll past the moment God set aside for you. And while you are there, I want to ask you to do something that costs you nothing but carries enormous weight in this community of chosen ones that God is assembling right now. Like this message, share it with someone who is in a season of waiting, someone who has been praying without seeing, someone who looks strong on the outside, but is quietly running low on the inside. Your one share could be the divine appointment that changes their entire trajectory. Subscribe so that every time heaven moves through this channel, you are the first to receive it. And if you feel led to sow into this work and help carry this message to more chosen ones around the world, the link is in the description and in the pinned comment below. Every seed you plant here goes directly into reaching the ones God is still trying to find. You are not here by accident. You were appointed for this moment. And heaven has not finished speaking. There is something the researchers discovered that the world was not ready to hear, and it connects directly to everything you just received in the opening of this message. When scientists began mapping the brainwave activity of individuals who demonstrated extraordinary levels of creativity, intuition, problem solving, and what could only be described as divine perception, they found a pattern, not a random pattern, a specific, measurable, reproducible frequency that appeared again and again in people who seemed to operate on a different level than everyone around them. People who made decisions that defied logic and turned out to be right. People who woke up with solutions they had not consciously worked out. People who walked into rooms and shifted the atmosphere without trying. The researchers called it theta, and at its highest activation, they called it gamma. But beloved, what the scientists measured in their laboratories, God designed in eternity. You were built to carry this frequency. The chosen ones, the ones set apart before the womb, the ones appointed and called according to a purpose that stretches beyond what any human curriculum could teach. They have always operated from a different signal. Children carry it naturally. That is why a child can learn a language in months that takes an adult years. That is why a child can look at a problem and find a solution that every educated adult in the room missed. That is why Jesus said, "Unless you become like a little child, you cannot enter the kingdom." He was not speaking only about humility. He was speaking about frequency, about the state of mind and spirit that remains open, receptive, and alive to the voice of heaven without the interference of fear, trauma, cynicism, and the accumulated noise of a world that has been working very hard to shut that signal down in you. And this is where a man named Dr. James Rivers enters the story in a way that is not coincidence, but confirmation. Dr. James Rivers spent more than 30 years as a neuroscientist, trained at MIT, and connected to research programs that extended into partnerships with NASA. For decades, he studied the human brain not as a machine, but as a receiver. His question was not simply how does the brain work, but what is the brain designed to receive? And after thousands of days of research, after studying the brainwave patterns of children, of meditators, of artists, of leaders who seem to carry an unusual level of clarity and persistence touched, he arrived at a discovery that changed everything he thought he understood about human potential. The brain does not generate its best intelligence on its own. It receives it. And it receives it most powerfully when it is operating in a specific state, a state called the theta wave, sitting between 4 and 8 hertz, the exact frequency where creativity, deep memory, intuition, and what can only be described as divine download all become accessible at once. And just above that, in the gamma range, sits the state that researchers have called the genius state, the eureka state, the state where the walls between what you know and what you are designed to know become thin enough to step through. The problem is not that you were not built for this. You were. The problem is that somewhere between childhood and adulthood, between innocence and experience, between the frequency you were born carrying and the noise the world layered on top of it, that signal got buried, not destroyed. Never destroyed, buried. And Dr. Rivers built something to help you uncover it. He called it the Genius Wave. It is a 7-minute audio experience, and I want you to hear that number again, because you have encountered it before in this message. 7 minutes. In the opening of what God is saying to you today, you were invited into 7 minutes of stillness, 7 minutes of alignment, 7 minutes of saying to heaven, I am here and I am ready. That was not accidental. That was preparation. Because the same 7 minutes that open your spirit to the voice of God are the same 7 minutes that science has identified as the optimal window for your brain to shift out of the closed, contracted, stressed frequency it operates in by default and into the open, receptive, luminous state it was created for. The Genius Wave works through a technology called brainwave entrainment. Your brain has a natural ability to synchronize with external frequencies. When you hear a sound designed at a specific hertz level, your brain begins to mirror it. The way a tuning fork placed near another tuning fork causes both to vibrate at the same pitch. The audio in the Genius Wave uses binaural beats and isochronic tones, precisely calibrated frequencies, delivered through headphones that guide your brain gently, but powerfully into the theta and gamma states within minutes. No meditation practice required, no years of discipline, no special knowledge, just 7 minutes, a pair of headphones, and the willingness to receive what God and science are both pointing you toward at the same time. Now I want to share something with you that came from a real person, someone whose circumstances may sound familiar to you. A woman who had been carrying the weight of financial pressure, relational exhaustion, and a deep spiritual hunger that nothing she tried seemed to satisfy, began using the Genius Wave every morning before the rest of her household woke up. Within the first week, she described something she had not felt in years, a quietness behind her eyes that was not emptiness but clarity. By the third week, she said a solution to a business she had been circling for 8 months simply arrived one morning as she sat in that 7-minute window. She did not strain for it. She received it. And the income that followed that one decision changed her family's trajectory in a way she still struggles to put into words. Another man, a father working 2 jobs and feeling like he was failing at both, began the practice not expecting much. He told his story in a message that said simply that for the first time in 4 years, he felt like himself again, not a better version, not a new version, himself. The version of him that existed before exhaustion and pressure compressed him down to something unrecognizable. The Genius Wave did not add something foreign into him. It restored something original. Now I know what some of you are thinking right now, and I want to address it directly before we go any further, because your hesitation deserves honesty, not pressure. You may be thinking that $39 is not nothing, and you are right. It is not nothing, especially not in a season where every dollar carries the weight of a decision. I understand that, and I want you to know that the price is not set where it is to make this easy. It is set where it is because Dr. Rivers made a deliberate choice to make this accessible to the ones who need it most. Not just the ones who can afford premium wellness programs and private coaching and retreat experiences that cost thousands. The regular price of the Genius Wave is $49. But through the link in the pinned comment below, you can access it today for $39. That is a $10 reduction made specifically for this community, for the chosen ones who arrived at this message through divine appointment, rather than casual browsing. And it comes with a 90-day money-back guarantee. 90 full days. That is 3 months of using this tool every morning. 3 months of showing up for your brain and your spirit in 7-minute windows. 3 months of giving yourself the opportunity to receive what God has been trying to release into your life. And if at the end of those 90 days, you do not feel that something has genuinely shifted, you receive every cent returned to you without argument, without forms to fill, without the exhausting process of justifying your experience to anyone. But I need to say something clearly, and I need you to hear it as protection, not as pressure. There are counterfeit versions of the Genius Wave circulating on unauthorized platforms, files being sold or distributed by people who have no connection to Dr. Rivers or to the research behind this product. Downloading from those sources does not give you the Genius Wave. It gives you an imitation that carries none of the precise calibration that makes the original effective, and in some cases, it may carry corrupted audio that does the opposite of what you are seeking. The only safe, verified, legitimate access point is the link in the pinned comment below. That is the only place. Do not trust a link shared in a reply, in a private message, or on any other platform. The pinned comment is the door. Everything else is a distraction designed to redirect your breakthrough before it reaches you. And finally, this offer at $39 is not permanent. The window is limited, not as a sales tactic, but as a reality of how this distribution agreement is structured. When the allotted access at this price point closes, the price returns to $49 or higher. The chosen ones who act within the window of their appointed moment are the ones who step into what was prepared for them. The ones who wait until it is more convenient often find that the door they hesitated before no longer opens at the same terms. You have been chosen for this moment. The link is waiting. Heaven is watching, and your brain was designed for exactly what you are about to receive. You have been dismissing things that God sent on purpose, and it is time to call that what it is. Think back across the last several months of your life, not the big dramatic moments, but the quiet ones. The ones that happen between tasks, between conversations, between the ordinary movements of a day you were not paying close attention to. The song that came on at the exact moment you were sitting in your car, trying not to cry, and the lyrics landed so precisely on the thing you had not told anyone that you looked around the vehicle as though someone else must have arranged it. The dream. You woke from at 3 in the morning that felt less like a dream and more like a briefing, a specific, sequential, almost instructional experience that faded before you could write it down but left a residue of knowing that stayed with you for days. The stranger who said something in passing, something they could not have known was relevant to you. Something that answered a question you had been holding silently for weeks, and then walked away without any awareness of what they had just delivered. You filed all of those under coincidence, under mood, under your imagination, working overtime in a season of stress. You explain them away with the language of a world that has trained you to distrust the signals that do not arrive through approved channels. And in doing so, you did not protect yourself from false hope. You protected yourself from true activation, because every single one of those moments was a transmission. Every one of them was heaven adjusting the signal, narrowing the frequency, trying to reach you through whatever gap in your noise and your resistance it could find. God does not give up when you do not hear the first time. He does not retract the message and redirect it to someone more attentive. He recalibrates. He finds another angle. He sends the same truth through a different vessel, a different sound, a different set of circumstances, again and again, with a patience that should undo you when you finally recognize what it means. It means He has not stopped trying to reach you. Even now, even after everything you have been through, even after the seasons when your faith wore thin and your prayers felt mechanical and the distance between you and God felt less like a trial and more like a permanent condition, He kept transmitting. And tonight, through this message, through the very fact that you are still here listening, He has found you again. The book of Romans chapter 8 verse 14 says this: "For those who are led by the Spirit of God are the children of God, not those who are perfect, not those who have never doubted or wandered, or gone quiet for long stretches of time. Those who are led." And being led requires one thing that most chosen ones resist far longer than they should. It requires following a signal you cannot always fully explain before you have arrived at the destinations it is pointing toward. It requires trusting the transmission before you have decoded every detail of the message. You have been waiting to understand before you move. But the chosen ones in every generation of Scripture were not given full comprehension before they were asked to take a step. Abraham did not know where he was going when he left. Moses did not know how the sea would open before he raised his staff. Esther did not know whether she would survive the audience before she walked through the door. The faith was not the absence of uncertainty. The faith was the willingness to move while uncertain, because the signal from heaven was stronger than the argument from fear. And here is what makes your particular season so significant and so dangerous at the same time. The signs God has been sending you have not been vague. They have been specific. Specific enough that when I describe them, something in you nods. Not because I know your life in detail, but because the Spirit that is speaking through this message knows exactly what has been happening in the quiet corners of your existence that no one else has seen. You have been waking up with a name on your heart, a direction, a word, and then spending the first hour of your morning burying it under the weight of practicality. You have been having conversations with people who are living the life you feel called to. And instead of receiving it as confirmation, you have been receiving it as comparison, telling yourself the story that it is easier for them, that they had advantages you were not given, that your version of that life is somehow less available to you than it was to them. You have been standing at doors, literal and figurative, and pulling your hand back from the handle at the last moment. Because the voice that speaks loudest in that instant is not the voice of God, but the voice of every previous disappointment stacked up behind you. And the enemy has been counting on exactly that pattern continuing. Because here is what darkness understands about you that you have not yet fully understood about yourself. Your assignment is not small. Your calling is not decorative. The thing God placed inside you before you were formed in the womb is not a gentle suggestion or a nice possibility for your life if everything goes well. It is a world-altering, atmosphere-shifting, generationally consequential mandate. And the intensity of the opposition you have faced is not evidence that God forgot you. It is evidence that what you carry matters enough to fight over. The signs were never coincidence. The repeated patterns, the recurring themes, the same message arriving through different mouths and different moments across months and years. That is not your imagination constructing a narrative to comfort itself. That is heaven building a case. That is God compiling evidence that He is real, that He is present, that He is speaking, and that everything He promised over your life at the beginning of your story is still in motion, even in the chapters that felt like endings. And the theta frequency, that deep brain state that Dr. Rivers spent 30 years studying, the one that children carry naturally and that most adults have lost access to, under layers of stress and learned limitation, that frequency is the neurological signature of a mind that is still open to transmission. It is what your brain looks like when it is doing what God designed it to do, receiving, not striving, not performing, not defending, receiving. And the reason the signs have felt harder to read in recent seasons is not that God has been speaking more quietly. It is that the noise inside your own nervous system has been louder. The anxiety, the unresolved grief, the chronic low-grade fear that something will go wrong before the promise arrives. That noise sits in a frequency that drowns out the very signal heaven has been broadcasting directly into your life. This is why the 7-minute practice matters in a dimension that goes beyond productivity or cognitive performance. When you deliberately shift your brain into the theta and gamma states through the calibrated audio that the Genius Wave provides, you are not just improving your memory or your focus or your creative output, though all of those things happen. You are clearing the static. You are restoring the receiver. You are creating the internal conditions under which the voice of God, which has never stopped speaking, can finally be heard with the clarity it deserves and the response it requires. The signs you dismissed were never coincidences. They were coordinates. And now that you know that, the only question that remains is what you are going to do with the understanding that has just landed in your spirit. Because understanding without response is just information. And God did not bring you to this moment to add more information to a life that is already full of things you know but have not yet moved on. He brought you here because the season of waiting and wondering and dismissing is over. The season of receiving and responding and walking in the full signal of what you were made for has been trying to begin for longer than you know. And heaven is holding the door open right now, in this moment, with a patience and a love that should silence every excuse you have been rehearsing. The coordinates were always pointing here, and here is where you are. There is a silence that follows a warning that is different from every other kind of silence. And if you have ever stood at the edge of a decision you knew mattered and felt the air change around you, then you already understand what this section is going to ask you to sit with. Because what happens when heaven goes silent is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. There is no thunder, no visible closing of a door, no moment where God stands before you and says, "This is the last time I will speak on this matter." That is not how it works. And that is precisely what makes it so devastating when it happens. The silence of heaven does not feel like punishment from the outside. It feels, from the inside, like peace. Like finally being left alone. Like the pressure you have been under has simply lifted, and you can breathe again without the weight of a calling pressing against your chest every morning. And some of you have already tasted that silence. You know what I am describing not as a future warning, but as a present reality. There was a time when the signals were constant, when the dreams were vivid, when the nudges were persistent, and the confirmations arrived before you even finished forming the question. And then somewhere in the middle of your resistance, your delay, your choosing comfort over obedience, the frequency changed. Not all at once, gradually. The way a radio station fades when you drive too far from the tower. First, it becomes a little harder to hear. Then there is static mixed in with the signal. Then one day you realize you are only hearing static, and you cannot remember exactly when the voice stopped coming through clearly. That is what the silence of heaven feels like from the inside of it. And the most dangerous part is that life continues. The sun rises, the routines carry on. Nothing collapses dramatically to alert you to what has shifted in the spiritual dimension of your existence. You simply begin to drift. And most ones are some of the smart-breaking Freudian figures in the entire narrative of Scripture, because they are people who carried real fire, real gifting, real divine appointment, and who slowly settled into a version of their lives that was comfortable enough to stop pushing toward the original design. Think of Samson, who carried an anointing so powerful that entire armies fell before him, not because of his physical strength alone, but because of the divine frequency that moved through his consecration. And watch how the silence came for him. Not through a single dramatic rebellion, but through a series of small compromises, each one feeling manageable, each one feeling like an exception rather than a pattern, until the morning he woke and the Scripture says something that should arrest every chosen one who reads it. He did not know that the Spirit of the Lord had departed from him. He did not know. He went through the motions of his calling with the assumption that the power was still present, and discovered only in the moment of crisis that the signal had been fading for longer than he had been paying attention. You are not Samson, but the pattern is not unique to him. It is the pattern of every chosen one who allowed the gap between what God said and what they did to widen slowly enough that they never felt the exact moment it became dangerous. And this is why what you are receiving in this season, through this message and through the tools that God is placing in your path, is not a luxury. It is not spiritual self-improvement for people who have extra time and emotional bandwidth. It is a lifeline. It is heaven narrowing the frequency one more time, not because the signal was ever gone, but because you are still receivable. The door is not shut, the frequency is not dead, and the silence you may have been living inside is not a verdict. It is an invitation to return to the calibration you were made for. The Genius Wave, the 7-minute audio practice that Dr. James Rivers developed through more than 30 years of neuroscientific research connected to MIT and to NASA-level studies of human cognition. It exists precisely for this moment, not the moment when everything is already flowing and the chosen one is operating at full capacity and the blessings are visible and the calling is clear. It exists for the moment when the static is loud and the signal feels faint, and the gap between who you were created to be and who you are currently living as feels too wide to cross without help. 7 minutes of precisely calibrated theta and gamma frequency audio. 7 minutes of restoring the receiver that anxiety and grief and accumulated disappointment have been slowly degrading. 7 minutes that your brain was designed to respond to. Because this is not something being imposed on your biology, but something being restored within it. And beloved, I want to speak to something that some of you have been carrying quietly through this entire message. The guilt. The specific, low-grade, persistent guilt of a chosen one who knows they have been delaying. Who knows the call is real. Who knows the signs were not coincidence? Who has sat in services and scrolling sessions and quiet moments and felt the pull and chosen to scroll past it, sleep on it, deal with it later. Wait until the circumstances were more aligned. Wait until fear was smaller. Wait until it felt safer to say yes to the full weight of what God placed in them. I want you to hear this clearly. The guilt is not condemnation. Condemnation wants you paralyzed. Guilt, the holy kind, the kind that comes from the Spirit rather than from the enemy. It wants you moving. It is not a sentence. It is a signal. And the signal is saying the same thing it has always been saying, which is that you were not built for the version of your life you have been settling for, and heaven has not given up on the version it designed you for. So let me ask you something simple and direct. Who in your life right now is sitting in the same silence you have been navigating? Who in your circle is carrying the weight of a calling they cannot name but cannot ignore? Who woke up this morning feeling the faint echo of something they were supposed to be and could not find the door back to it? Because this message did not reach you only for your own sake. It reached you because you are a node in a network of chosen ones that God is activating simultaneously, and the person you share this with today may be receiving the same divine appointment through your simple act of passing it forward that you received when this message found you. Like this message, if it has moved something in you that needed to move, not as a transaction, not as a metric, but as an act of agreement with what heaven is doing in this moment. Share it with the person whose name just came to your mind. Because the fact that their name arrived in your thoughts right now is not random, and you already know that. Subscribe to this channel so that every time God moves through this space, you are positioned to receive it without having to search for it in a peak season when you may not have the energy to go looking. And if this work has been a place where your spirit has been fed, where the signal has been clearer, where something in you has been restored to a frequency you thought you had lost, and you feel led to sow into it, so that more chosen ones can find their way here, the link is in the description and in the pinned comment below. Every seed planted in this ground goes directly toward carrying this frequency further, toward reaching the ones who are still in the static, still in the silence, still waiting for the signal to find them one more time before they give up on the idea that it ever will. The silence of heaven is not God's final word over your life. It is the last warning before the most important yes you have ever spoken begins to change everything. And you are still in the window. The frequency is still findable. The receiver inside you is still alive. And heaven, patient and persistent and profoundly committed to the assignment it placed in you before the foundations of the earth were laid, is still transmitting. Do not let this be the moment you file under coincidence. You have done that enough times already, and you know, somewhere beneath all the noise, exactly what this moment is asking of you. The enemy knew what you were carrying before you did, and that is the piece of information that will reframe every hard season you have ever lived through if you are willing to receive it right now. Go back to the beginning of your story. Not the beginning you remember consciously, not the childhood memories that surface easily when someone asks about your past, but the deeper beginning, the one that existed before you had language for it. The one where something in you was already different, already marked, already operating on a frequency that the people around you could sense even when they could not name it. You did not fit the mold that was handed to you. Not because you were difficult, not because there was something wrong with you, but because the mold was never designed for what you were carrying. And the people who sensed that difference responded to it in ways that shaped you, in ways you are still untangling today. Some of them celebrated it, but more of them, and this is the part that needs to be said plainly, more of them were unsettled by it. Parents who did not know how to hold a child who saw things differently. Teachers who interpreted your unusual perception as disruption rather than gifting. Friends who drifted away at the moments when your light should have been growing brighter, as though something in them could not remain comfortable in the presence of what you were becoming. Relationships that collapsed without clear reason at the exact moment you were on the edge of a breakthrough. Opportunities that appeared and then dissolved is that left less like bad luck and more like targeted interference. You have explained all of that through the lens of your own failure, through the narrative that you were too much or not enough, that you made the wrong choices, that if you had been smarter or braver or more disciplined, things would have unfolded differently. And while personal responsibility is real and necessary, and not something this message is asking you to abandon, there is a dimension of your story that pure self-analysis cannot reach, because not everything that came against you was about you. Some of it was about what you were assigned to carry into the world, and the specific, calculated, strategic opposition that assignment attracted before you even understood what you were holding. The enemy does not waste energy on people who pose no threat. Darkness does not organize sustained campaigns against lives that are not carrying something dangerous to the kingdom of opposition. The level of warfare that has followed you, the specific flavors of it, the way it has targeted your identity, your voice, your confidence, your sense of divine connection, the way it has repeatedly struck at the exact things you would need most to fulfill your calling, that is not random. That is reconnaissance. That is an adversary who did the research before you did and arrived at a conclusion about your assignment that you are only now beginning to accept for yourself. And the Word of God does not leave us without clarity on this reality. The book of 1 Peter, chapter 5, verse 8 says this: "Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour." Notice what that verse does not say. It does not say he attacks everyone equally. It does not say he distributes his attention without strategy or discernment. A lion does not expend its energy on prey that does not satisfy the hunger. A lion selects. A lion watches. A lion identifies which animal in the herd is worth the chase before it moves. And the adversary, who has studied human souls across generations of divine history, who has watched the pattern of how God raises up chosen ones and what those chosen ones carry into the earth, he selects with the same predatory intelligence. You were selected not because you were weak. You were selected because you were dangerous to everything he has built in the territory you were assigned to shift. Now sit with that for a moment, because it requires a reorientation that does not happen quickly. Every rejection you absorbed and turned inward as evidence of your inadequacy, it was not evidence of your inadequacy. It was evidence of your assignment. Every relationship that was sabotaged at the moment you were beginning to step into something greater, that was not proof that you are difficult to love or impossible to commit to. That was targeted disruption of a connection that would have accelerated your movement toward the thing darkness needed you to never reach. Every door that closed in your face when you had done everything right, when you had prepared and positioned and shown up with everything you had, that was not God withholding from you. That was the adversary working the systems of this world, the ones he has influence over when chosen ones are not yet walking in the full authority of their calling, to redirect you away from the breakthrough before it could become momentum. This is not an invitation to blame every difficulty on spiritual warfare and abdicate responsibility for your own growth and choices. That would be its own kind of deception, but it is an invitation to stop carrying the full weight of a story that had more authors than just you and your own limitations. It is an invitation to look back at the battlefield of your life with new eyes and recognize that the intensity of what came against you is itself a form of testimony. You were worth fighting over. You were worth the sustained campaign. And the fact that you are still here, still breathing, still carrying the call, even when it has felt like a burden too heavy to hold, That is not accidental survival. That is divine preservation of someone whose assignment is not yet complete. And here is where the connection between the spiritual reality and the neuroscientific one becomes impossible to dismiss. The primary targets of the enemy's campaign against a chosen one are never random. They are always the things that would most empower the assignment: the voice, the confidence, the sense of divine connection, the ability to receive direction and act on it with clarity. And then there is one more thing: the frequency, the inner state of openness and receptivity and creative, intuitive, God-connected awareness that allows a chosen one to operate from the dimension they were built for, rather than from the contracted, defended, noise-saturated dimension that fear and trauma and sustained opposition produce. The theta state that Dr. James Rivers spent more than 30 years studying is not just a cognitive enhancement. It is the neurological signature of a soul that has not been successfully closed down by the warfare it has walked through. It is what your brain looks like when the enemy has not won, and the reason he works so hard, through stress, through relational pain, through financial pressure, through identity attack, after identity attack, is because a brain locked in the high frequency, high cortisol, survival-oriented state of chronic stress cannot access the theta range, cannot access the gamma range, cannot receive the transmissions that heaven is broadcasting, cannot operate from the creative, intuitive, divinely connected intelligence that the assignment requires. He is not just to make your life hard. He is trying to jam the signal. He is trying to keep your brain in a frequency that makes you unreachable by the voice, that would tell you exactly what to do next and give you the clarity to do it without the paralysis of fear. And every morning you spend 7 minutes deliberately, intentionally restoring your brain to the frequency it was designed for. Every morning you use the calibrated theta and gamma audio of the genius wave to clear the static that warfare has deposited in your nervous system. You are doing something that is simultaneously scientific and spiritual. You are refusing to let the enemy's primary strategy succeed. You are taking back the receiver. You are saying to every force that has worked to jam your signal that it did not work, that you are still open, that heaven can still reach you, and that the assignment plant that was placed in you before the foundations of the earth were laid is still very much alive and very much in motion. The enemy knew before you did. But what he did not account for was this moment, this realization, this reconnection to the frequency that his entire campaign was designed to prevent. He knew what you were carrying, and now, finally, so do you. God saw it, every single moment of it. And before this mismatch moves any further forward, that truth needs to land somewhere inside you that arguments cannot reach and explanations cannot touch. Because what you have been carrying in silence deserves to be witnessed before it is addressed. And heaven has been witnessing it longer and more completely than any human being in your life ever could. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that chosen ones carry that does not show up on the outside in ways that other people can easily identify and respond to. It is not the exhaustion of someone who has been idle or careless or passive about their life. It is the exhaustion of someone who has been faithful in ways that received no applause, who showed up when they did not feel like showing up, who gave from reserves they had not yet replenished because the need in front of them was real, and they were the one who could see it clearly enough to respond, who prayed in the dark for people who never knew they were being prayed for, who held space for others in their breaking seasons while quietly managing their own fractures behind closed doors, because the role they carried in the lives around them did not seem to leave room for them to also be the one who needed holding. You have been the strong one for so long that the idea of being held feels almost foreign to you now. And somewhere in the accumulation of all the seasons where you gave more than you received, where you trusted and were disappointed, where you stepped out and the ground did not appear under your foot the way you believed it would, somewhere in all of that, a very specific lie took root in a place you may not have examined yet. The lie that says that God sees what you sacrifice for others, but somehow does not register what it costs you that He watches you pour out, but does not account for the empty places that pouring leaves behind. That your faithfulness is noted in the ledger of heaven, but your pain is somehow too small or too complicated or too entangled with your own choices to warrant the same quality of divine attention. That lie is not from God, and it is time for it to be uprooted from the place it has been sitting in your spirit, quietly poisoning your ability to receive what heaven has been trying to give you for longer than you have been able to accept. The God who formed you before the womb, who set you apart before your first breath, who appointed you to an assignment that the enemy considered threatening enough to organize sustained warfare around, that God has not been averting His eyes from your pain. He has not been impatiently waiting for you to get yourself together so that He can resume the relationship. He has been in the pain with you, present in the 3 a.m. moments when the weight on your chest had no name, present in the conversations where you smiled and said you were fine because explaining the truth would have taken more energy than you had available. Present in the car, in the shower, in the quiet space between sleeping and waking, where the real version of how you are feeling surfaces before your coping mechanisms have fully come online for the day. He saw the tears you did not let fall in front of anyone. He counted the ones you let fall alone. He was in the room when you questioned whether any of this, the faith, the calling, the years of believing in a promise that still had not fully materialized, whether any of it was real, or whether you had been building your interior life on something that was never going to hold the weight you placed on it. He did not leave that room. He did not turn away from that question. He stayed, and He is staying now, in this moment, as this message reaches the part of you that you do not usually let public. The weight you have been carrying was never meant to be carried alone. Not the spiritual weight of the calling, not the emotional weight of the disappointment, not the relational weight of being the one who holds others while quietly coming apart yourself, and not the neurological weight of a nervous system that has been running in survival mode for so long that rest itself has started to feel unsafe, because that last one is real in a way that science has now confirmed, and that the wisdom of God encoded into the architecture of your brain long before any researcher put language to it. When Dr. James Rivers mapped the brainwave patterns of people under sustained pressure, under chronic stress, under the kind of long-term emotional and circumstantial weight that many chosen ones carry as a simple feature of the lives they have been navigating, what he found was not surprising in theory, but devastating in practice. The brain under that kind of load locks itself into a high-frequency defensive state that makes the theta and gamma ranges neurologically inaccessible. Not temporarily, persistently. And the longer the nervous system remains in that contracted, defended, high-alert state, the harder it becomes to access the creative, intuitive, receptive intelligence that was designed to be your natural operating frequency. In other words, the weight you have been carrying is not just emotionally heavy. It is neurologically suppressive. It is physically altering the state of the very receiver that God designed to keep you connected to the transmissions of heaven, to the creative solutions that were supposed to flow through you for the people around you. to the clarity of direction that would allow you to step into your assignment with confidence rather than stumbling forward in static and exhaustion. And the 7-minute practice of the Genius Wave is not a substitute for healing. It is not a replacement for the deep work of surrender and renewal that God is also calling you into in this season. But it is a doorway. A neurological doorway that takes the brain that has been locked in defense and begins, gently and precisely, and within a time frame that even the most depleted person can manage, to restore it to the state where receiving becomes possible again, where the voice of God can land on clear ground instead of fighting through layers of accumulated noise, where the solutions and the clarity and the creative intelligence that were always yours by divine design can begin to surface again from beneath the weight that buried them. This channel exists because there are chosen ones in every corner of the world who are carrying exactly what you have been carrying, and who need to hear that they are not alone, that what they are experiencing has a name and a pathway through it, and that God has not forgotten the promise He made over their lives in the quieter seasons when believing felt easier. And right now, this channel does not earn income from the platform it sits on. We are not monetized in the way that many channels are. But we have made a choice to keep showing up, to keep delivering these messages, to keep building this space where chosen ones can be found by the frequency they were made for. Because the alternative is silence, and the people who need this cannot afford for us to go silent. If this message has reached something in you today, if something that was closed has opened even slightly, if the weight you walked in carrying feels even marginally less like a sentence and more like a season with an end point, and if you feel stirred to support the work that made this possible, the donate link is in the pinned comment and in the description below. This channel is sustained by the chosen ones it serves. Every contribution, regardless of its size, is an act of partnership in something that is reaching people in places and seasons that we may never fully know about on this side of eternity. And if you are in a season where giving financially is not possible, then your presence here matters. Watching to the end, leaving a comment, sharing this message with the person whose face came to your mind somewhere in the last few minutes, that is also sowing. That is also partnership. That also carries weight in the economy of heaven. Like this message, if something in it has spoken to the part of you that you do not usually let anyone see, share it because someone in your life is carrying the same weight you have been carrying and has not yet found the language to describe it. Subscribe so that the next message heaven releases through this space finds you already positioned to receive it. The weight you have been carrying was never meant to be permanent. It was meant to be the context in which God demonstrated His faithfulness in a way that only becomes possible when the burden was real enough that the deliverance could not be explained any other way. You were not forgotten. You were being prepared, and the preparation is not wasted. It is the very thing that makes what comes next something the world will not be able to argue with. There is a moment in the life of every chosen one where obedience stops being a concept and becomes a confrontation, and you are standing in that moment right now, whether you feel ready for it or not. Not the theoretical obedience that exists comfortably inside sermons and devotionals, and the kind of faith conversations that happen in well-lit rooms among people who are all broadly in agreement that God is good and His plans are trustworthy. That kind of obedience costs very little because it is never actually tested against anything real. The obedience that heaven is asking of you in this season is the other kind, the kind that arrives in the middle of uncertainty and asks you to move before the path is fully illuminated. The kind that requires you to release something you have been holding on to because holding it felt safer than trusting comes after you let it go. The kind that looks from the outside like foolishness and from the inside like the most terrifying and the most alive you have ever been simultaneously. And the reason this particular act of obedience carries so much weight in this moment of your life is not simply spiritual. It is structural. Because there are things that God has prepared for you, specific things that have your name on them in a dimension you cannot currently see with your natural eyes, that are architecturally dependent on your yes. They cannot be rerouted to someone else. They were not designed with a backup recipient. The provision, the open door, the relationship, the creative breakthrough, the financial shift, the restoration of something you had quietly accepted as permanently lost. These things were constructed around the specific shape of your assignment. And your obedience is the key that was cut to fit the lock that stands between where you are and where those things are waiting. This is not prosperity theology dressed in chosen one language. This is the consistent pattern of Scripture, read honestly across the full arc of God's interaction with the people He called and set apart for specific purposes. The provision did not precede the obedience. It followed it, and it followed it in ways that were impossible to explain through natural logic. Because the point was never the provision itself. The point was always the demonstration of a God whose word is reliable enough to act on before you can see the outcome. The book of Isaiah, chapter 1, verse 19 says this: "If you are willing and obedient, you will eat the good things of the land. Not if you are perfect. Not if you have never doubted or delayed or chosen comfort over calling in the seasons before this one." Willing and obedient. Two words that carry more weight than almost any other combination in the language of the covenant relationship between God and His chosen ones. Willing means the internal posture has shifted. It means the resistance that has been living in your chest, the one that knows the call is real and has been negotiating around it for longer than you want to admit, has been surrendered. Not because the fear disappeared, but because the authority of the one calling became larger in your awareness than the size of your uncertainty. And obedient means the shift in posture produced movement. It means something changed in the external reality of your life, because the internal reality was realigned with the divine. Instruction. Willing and obedient. Not willing and waiting for the fear to subside. Not willing and watching to see if someone else takes the step first and survives it. Willing and obedient, in that order, and then the eating of the good things of the land follows as a consequence that is as reliable as the word of the God who spoke it. Now here is what this means in practical terms for where you are standing today. Because the gap between a scriptural truth and a lived reality is a gap that chosen ones have been falling into for generations. And it is a gap that this message is specifically designed to help you cross. Your obedience in this season is going to require your mind to be clear enough to hear the specific instruction, because the instruction is not always the obvious one. Sometimes what God asks is counterintuitive. Sometimes it contradicts what the circumstances are loudly suggesting you should do. Sometimes it requires a level of creative, lateral, spiritually attuned thinking that the contracted, defended, noise-saturated state of a brain under pressure simply cannot access. And this is where the neurological and the spiritual intersect in a way that should cause something to connect in you. Right now, if you have been tracking this message across its full arc, you cannot consistently obey what you cannot clearly hear. And you cannot clearly hear in a state of neurological noise that has been building for months or years under the weight of everything the previous sections of this message have named. The stress, the sustained opposition, the accumulated grief and disappointment, and exhaustion of a chosen one who has been faithful in the dark for long enough that the dark has started to feel like the permanent condition rather than the transitional one. Dr. James Rivers, in his more than 30 years of neuroscientific research connected to MIT and to NASA-level studies of human cognition and brainwave activity, documented something that every person of deep faith should know. The decisions made from a brain locked in survival frequency thinking, the high cortisol, high alert, theta inaccessible state that chronic stress produces, are qualitatively different from the decisions made from a brain operating in the open, receptive, creatively alive theta and gamma states. Not slightly different, architecturally different. The quality of perception available to you, the range of solutions you can access, the clarity of the inner signal that tells you which direction to move and when. All of it changes when the brain shifts from the contracted state to the receptive one. And when that receptive state is active, when the theta and gamma frequencies are flowing and the hippocampus is engaged, and the creative and intuitive networks of the brain are operating without the interference of the stress response, the experience of hearing God, of receiving direction, of knowing with a clarity that goes beyond analysis which step to take next, that experience becomes not a rare grace for the extraordinarily faithful, but a consistent, accessible, daily reality for the chosen one who has learned to steward the receiver they were given. This is what the 7-minute practice of the Genius Wave opens up. Not as a replacement for prayer, not as a substitute for the disciplines of the Spirit that have always been the foundation of a life lived in genuine connection with God, but as a neurological complement to those disciplines, as the physical dimension of what prayer and worship and silence are doing in the spiritual dimension. Because God made both the spirit and the brain, and He made them to work together. And when both are operating in the state they were designed for, the obedience that seemed too costly from inside the noise becomes the obvious, even joyful response to a voice that is finally coming through without static. Your obedience will unlock what no human hand can give you. That is not a motivational phrase. That is a structural reality of how the kingdom of God operates in the earth through the lives of the people He has chosen and called and set apart for assignments that the natural world does not have the resources to fulfill on its own. The provision that is waiting on the other side of your yes is not something that exists in any human system or economy or network of relationships. It is held in the hand of a God whose resources are not constrained by the same limitations that have been constraining your imagination of what is possible for your life. But that provision is accessed through obedience, specifically through yours in this season, in the specific area where you have been negotiating rather than surrendering, in the particular door you have been standing in front of with your hand on the handle and your weight still on your back foot, because moving fully through it would require releasing your grip on the version of safety you have constructed around the possibility of disappointment. Willing and obedient. The good things of the land are not withheld from you because you are unworthy of them. They are waiting for you because they were always destined for you. And the key that opens the storehouse where they are held was cut in the shape of your surrender before the foundation of the world was laid. You are closer than you think to the moment when everything you have been believing for begins to move. And the step between here and there is not as large as the enemy has been telling you it is. It is the size of one willing and obedient. Yes, spoken from a heart that has finally become quieter than the fear that has been drowning it out. There is a truth about you that science has now confirmed and that heaven declared before any laboratory existed to measure it. And the convergence of those two streams of knowledge in this moment is not accidental, but appointed. When Dr. James Rivers began his research more than 30 years ago, he was not looking for God. He was looking for the mechanism behind human genius. He wanted to understand why certain individuals, across cultures and centuries and wildly different circumstances, seem to operate from a dimension of intelligence and creativity, an intuitive knowing that the standard models of human cognition could not adequately explain. Why did some people consistently arrive at solutions that others missed entirely? Why did certain individuals seem to perceive patterns and possibilities that were invisible to equally educated and experienced minds around them? Why did the ones history remembered as geniuses, as visionaries, as world changers, so frequently describe their greatest breakthroughs as something received rather than something constructed? And what he found, after thousands of days of research and the mapping of brainwave activity across hundreds of subjects, was a frequency, a specific, measurable, reproducible neurological state that the brains of these individuals shared in common. Not a state of intense concentration, not a state of effortful striving, a state of open, receptive, luminous availability, sitting in the theta range between 4 and 8 Hertz, with peaks of activity extending into the gamma range that researchers began calling the genius state because no other word adequately captured what was happening. In those moments, when the walls between what a person knew and what they were suddenly able to perceive became thin enough to step through. And here is the detail that should stop you completely and hold you in place for a moment. The brains that most consistently and naturally produced this state were not the brains of adults who had studied and trained and disciplined themselves into it over decades of dedicated practice. They were the brains of children, specifically young children, before the accumulated weight of performance pressure and social conditioning and the neurological impact of chronic stress had begun to compress the theta range and push the brain into the higher frequency defensive states that become the default operating mode for most adults by the time they reach their third decade of life. Children live they receive freely. They learn at rates that adult brains cannot match, not because they are more intelligent in the conventional sense, but because their receivers are open in a way that adult receivers have largely been shut down. They have not yet been taught that certain kinds of knowing are unreliable. They have not yet been conditioned to distrust the intuitive signal before the analytical one has confirmed it. They have not yet accumulated the layers of disappointment and defended identity that make the theta state feel unsafe to an adult nervous system that has learned to associate openness with vulnerability and vulnerability with pain. And Jesus said in the book of Matthew, chapter 18, verse 3, "Truly, I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." Read that with new eyes right now. Not just as a theological statement about humility, though it is that. Read it as a neurological instruction from the God who designed the brain he was speaking about. Become like little children. Return to the state of open receptivity that children carry naturally. Return to the frequency where receiving is effortless and knowing is not a product of striving, but a gift available to the one whose receiver is clear enough to catch it. Return to theta. Return to the state where the kingdom of heaven, which is not a distant location, but a present dimension of divine intelligence and provision and creative power, available to the chosen ones who can access it, becomes not a theological concept but a lived experience. Now here is where the spiritual truth and the scientific discovery converge in a way that should permanently alter how you understand what has been happening inside you across every season of your life, including the hardest ones. The theta state is not just the frequency of genius in the academic or creative sense. It is the frequency of the receiver that God built into the human brains specifically so that chosen ones could remain connected to the transmissions of heaven even while living inside the noise and pressure of an earthly existence. It is the neurological signature of a soul that is still open, still available, still capable of catching what heaven is broadcasting, even when the circumstances surrounding that soul are doing everything possible to compress it closed. And the enemy, who understands the architecture of what God designed far better than most chosen ones have been taught to recognize, has been working a specific strategy against you for years that targets this frequency directly, not through dramatic spiritual assault that you would immediately identify and resist, through the slow, steady, accumulative pressure of stress and disappointment and relational pain, and the particular exhaustion that comes from carrying a calling in a world that does not always make room for it, because a brain locked in chronic stress cannot access theta. A nervous system running in permanent high alert mode cannot drop into the receptive range, and a chosen one who cannot access the receptive range cannot hear with the clarity their assignment requires, cannot receive the creative solutions that were designed to flow through them, and cannot operate from the dimension of divine intelligence that their calling was built to channel into the earth. This is not a metaphor. This is measurable. This is what Dr. Rivers spent 30 years documenting in laboratory conditions: the neurological cost of sustained pressure on the brain's ability to access its own highest operating states. And the reason it matters to you right now, in this specific moment of this specific message, is that the weight you have been carrying, the opposition you have been navigating, the sustained campaign that Section 5 of this message named as targeted spiritual warfare, it has been doing exactly this to your receiver, compressing it, narrowing it, making the theta range harder and harder to reach without deliberate, intentional restoration. You were built for a frequency that the world has been working to push you out of, and the God who built you for it has not withdrawn the design simply because the noise got louder. The receiver is still there. The capacity is still present. The theta state that children carry naturally and that chosen ones were made to sustain across a lifetime of divine assignment is still available to you, not as a distant aspiration, but as your biological and spiritual birthright, waiting to be restored in the same 7-minute window that this message has been pointing toward from its very first breath. Because here is what those 7 minutes actually are in their deepest dimension. They are not a productivity hack. They are not a wellness trend dressed in scientific language to appeal to a generation that has lost faith in purely spiritual solutions. They are a return, a neurological return to the state that God designed you to operate from before the world began to come pressing you out of it. A deliberate, daily act of saying to your own nervous system that the survival frequency is not your home frequency, that the defended, contracted, static, saturated state that chronic pressure produces is not who you are, that underneath all of the noise and all of the weight and all of the accumulated evidence that this life is harder than it was supposed to be, there is a receiver that is still capable of picking up the signal that heaven's never stopped broadcasting in your direction. The genius wave within you is not a metaphor for potential. It is a literal frequency, a measurable neurological state, a God-designed signal that was woven into the architecture of your brain before your first breath, because the assignment you were made for required a receiver of extraordinary sensitivity and clarity. And every day you restore that receiver. Every day you return deliberately to the frequency you were made for. You are not just improving your cognitive performance or your creative output or your ability to solve problems with unusual clarity, though all of those things follow. You are fulfilling a stewardship. You are tending the instrument that heaven invested in you for the sake of an assignment that the world is still waiting to receive through you. Now, in this moment, I want you to do one simple thing that will take less than 10 seconds, but will carry a weight in the spiritual atmosphere around you that is far larger than the effort it requires. Type the words "I am restored" in the comments below. Not as performance, not as a declaration you are making for anyone watching, but as a personal act of agreement with what the Spirit of God and the science of the brain are both saying about you in this moment. I am restored means the receiver is coming back online. It means the static does not get the final word. It means you are choosing, in this specific moment, to return to the frequency you were made for. Type "I am restored." Let heaven record it. Let the chosen ones gathering in this space see that you were here and that you did not leave the same way you arrived. You are 7 minutes away from the version of yourself that your calling has always required. And that statement is neither exaggeration nor sales language, but a neurological and spiritual reality that everything this message has been building toward was designed to prepare you to receive. But before we arrive at the full weight of what those 7 minutes mean, there is something that needs to be said about the journey that brought you to this point in the message, because the arc of what God has been doing across every section of what you have received today is not random, and it is not coincidental, and it deserves to be named before we move into the final declaration that this section was built to carry. You began this message carrying a weight that most of the people in your life have not fully seen. You carried into this conversation the accumulated evidence of seasons that tested you beyond what felt survivable, of signs you dismissed because the world trained you to distrust the channels through which heaven most naturally speaks, of a silence that felt less like a pause and more like an ending, of an enemy whose strategy you were only beginning to understand, of a pain that had been witnessed by God even in the moments when no human being was present to sit with you in it, of an obedience that heaven was asking for in the specific area where surrender has always been most costly, and of a frequency, a God-designed neurological signal woven into the architecture of your brain before your first breath, that the world has been working systematically to compress into silence. And across every one of those sections, something has been happening that goes beyond information transfer. Something has been shifting in the receiver, not because of the words themselves, but because of the one behind them. The one who arranged for this message to find you at this specific moment in this specific season of your life, who has been threading a single consistent truth through every section of what you have heard today, which is that you were made for more than the static, and you were never designed to live there permanently, and the frequency you were built for has never stopped being available to you, even in the seasons when you could not hear it through the noise. The book of Philippians, chapter 4, verse 13 says this: "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." And I want you to hear that verse not as a motivational slogan printed on a water bottle or repeated in the kind of casual faith conversation that has stripped it of its original weight, but as a neuroscientific and spiritual declaration about the architecture of what God built into the chosen one who carries this calling. I can do all things, not some things, not the things that fall within the range of what my natural ability and my current circumstances and my emotional state on any given morning make accessible. All things, through Christ who strengthens me, through the divine connection that restores the receiver, through the frequency of heaven flowing into a brain that has been returned to the state it was designed for, through the theta and gamma activation that God wired into human biology so that the chosen ones he appointed would have neurological access to the intelligence and the creativity and the intuitive knowing that their assignments require. Paul wrote those words from prison, not from a season of visible breakthrough and abundant provision and the kind of circumstances that make believing feel easy. From prison, from a place of external constraint and limitation, and the kind of suffering that would have justified, in every human measure, a crisis of faith rather than a declaration of unlimited capacity. And yet the declaration came, I can do all things, because the receiver was clear, because the connection was intact, because the thesis of a soul surrendered to God produces a quality of peace and clarity and creative access that the external circumstances do not have the authority to cancel. This is what you are stepping into, not the easy version of the chosen one's life, where the calling is clear, and the provision is visible, and the path is illuminated far enough ahead that faith feels more like certainty than like the terrifying, glorious, counterintuitive choice to move before you can see where your foot will land. You are stepping into the real version, the version that Paul described from prison, the version that requires the receiver to be clear enough that the signal from heaven is louder than the noise of the circumstances, the version that is only possible for a brain operating in the frequency it was that for, and a spirit connected to the source that designed it. And here is what the research of Dr. James Rivers documented across decades of studying the brains of individuals who demonstrated exactly this quality of resilient, creative, circumstance-transcending intelligence. The ones who maintained access to the theta and gamma frequency states under pressure, the ones whose brains could return to the receptive range even in the middle of difficulty rather than locking permanently into the defensive high-frequency survival state. These were the ones who consistently produced outcomes that defied the logical predictions of their circumstances, who found solutions where others found only dead ends, who maintained a quality of clarity and creative output in the middle of seasons that should have shut those capacities down completely, who described, when asked about the source of that resilience, not a technique or a discipline, but a state, an inner state of availability and connection that they could return to deliberately and that consistently produced access to a dimension of knowing and creativity that felt to them less like something they generated and more like something they received. That is the theta state. That is the genius wave. That is the God-designed neurological signal that was woven into your biology before you were born, because the assignment you were made for required a receiver of extraordinary sensitivity. And the God who designed the assignment also designed the receiver and built into human biology the exact protocol for restoring it when the noise of the world had compressed it out of its natural range. 7 minutes. That is the protocol, not as an arbitrary number, but as the result of decades of research into the optimal duration for brainwave entrainment to shift the brain from the defensive high-frequency state into the theta and gamma range, without creating the kind of fatigue that longer sessions can produce. 7 minutes of precisely calibrated binaural beats and isochronic tones delivered through headphones. 7 minutes of deliberately, intentionally returning your brain to the state it was built for before. The day has had the chance to rebuild the static that accumulates naturally in a chosen one, navigating the particular pressures of the life they were made for. And what happens in the hours and days and weeks of consistent practice is not dramatic in the way that chosen ones sometimes expect transformation to feel. It is quieter than that, and more pervasive than that, and ultimately more life-altering than that. The clarity that begins arriving without you straining for it. The creative solutions that surface in the window immediately following the 7 minutes, as though they were waiting just below. The static for the static to clear. The quality of prayer that shifts from effortful reaching toward a God who feels distant to effortless receiving from a God whose presence is suddenly palpable in the same way it was in the seasons when the connection felt strongest. The decisions that begin to carry a quality of knowing behind them that your analytical mind cannot fully explain, but that your spirit recognizes as the signal rather than the noise. This is what consistent restoration of the receiver produces. Not a life without difficulty, not a calling without cost, not a path without the kind of uncertainty that requires genuine faith rather than the comfortable approximation of it, but a life in which the difficulty is navigated from the theta state rather than from the static. A calling carried by a receiver that is clear enough to hear the specific, daily, situationally precise instructions that the God who appointed you has always been trying to transmit. A path walked by a chosen one whose brain and spirit are operating in the alignment they were designed for, which means the gap between who they were created to be and who they are living as begins, slowly and then suddenly and then irreversibly, to close. You are 7 minutes away every morning from the version of yourself that your calling has always required, and that the weight of your story has been making it harder and harder to access. 7 minutes from the receiver restored. 7 minutes from the static cleared. 7 minutes from the signal coming through with the clarity that changes not just what you hear, but what you do with what you hear, which changes not just your daily experience, but the entire trajectory of everything your life was designed to produce in the earth. Paul said it from prison, and it landed as truth because the receiver was clear. You are not in prison, you are in a moment of activation, and the declaration is the same. You can do all things through the connection that restores everything the noise took from you, through the frequency you were made for, through the 7 minutes that return you every single morning to the version of yourself that heaven has always known you to be. Heaven is still open, and your name is still written there. Not the name the world gave you, not the name that has been called in disappointment or spoken in dismissal, or reduced to a label that tried to contain what was never designed to be contained. The name that was written before the foundations of the earth were laid. The name that exists in the record of heaven as the identifier of a specific, irreplaceable, divinely appointed soul who was sent into this generation to carry something that no one else was equipped to carry in exactly the way you were built to carry it. That name has not been erased by your delays. It has not been crossed out by your doubts. It has not faded in the seasons when you went quiet, and the distance between you and God felt less like a pause and more like a permanent condition. It is still there, unchanged, unhesitating, and the God who wrote it has been waiting with a patience that should undo every argument you have constructed for why it is too late, for why the window has closed, for why the version of your life that the calling was pointing toward has become inaccessible through the accumulation of time and missed moments, and choices that pulled you sideways from the original design. That patience is not passivity. It is not God sitting at a distance watching you struggle without intervention. It is the active, intentional, sustaining presence of a Father who has been holding the door open with His own hand across every season you needed Him to hold it, including the ones where you were not even looking in the direction of the door. You arrived at this message carrying something, a weight, a question, a quiet desperation that you may not have named even to yourself. A hunger for something more than the version of your life that the last several seasons have produced. A deep, persistent, unkillable, knowing that you were made for more than this. Not in the prideful sense of someone who believes they deserve better than others, but in the sacred sense of someone who can feel the gap between who they were created to be and who they have been living as, and who has been living inside that gap long enough that the ache of it has become a familiar companion. That ache is not a sign of ingratitude. It is not evidence that you have failed to appreciate what God has given you. It is the signal of a chosen one whose assignment is pressing against the container of their current reality and asking to be released into the fullness it was designed for. It is the theta wave of your spirit, the divine frequency that God wove into the deepest part of who you are, pulsing against the static of a world that has been trying to compress it into silence, and refusing to go quiet because the assignment it is connected to is not yet complete. And in this final section of this message, before we close what God has been building through every word you have received today, I want to pray with you, because what is shifting in this moment is not a transaction between you and a message. It is a reconnection between you and the God who has never stopped being present in your story, even in the chapters that felt most abandoned. If you are willing, I want to invite you to place your hand on your chest right now, right where the weight has been sitting, right where the ache lives, and receive these words not as someone else speaking, but as heaven finally saying out loud what has been true about you from the very beginning. Father, right now, in this moment, I bring before you the one who has been carrying more than they were meant to carry alone, the one who has been faithful in the dark, the one who has questioned and doubted and gone quiet and come back again, because something in them could not fully let go of the truth that you are real, and your promises are reliable, and the calling you placed in them before the womb was not a suggestion, but a mandate that their circumstances have not had the authority to cancel. Meet them here, in this specific moment, in whatever room they are sitting in, whatever weight is on their chest, whatever noise has been drowning out the signal of your voice in this season. Let them feel what has always been true, that you have not moved, that the door is still open, that their name is still written, and that everything you promised over their life at the beginning of their story is still in motion, still being prepared, still moving toward them with the same certainty and the same love that set them apart before their first breath was drawn. Restore the receiver, clear the static, and let what you have been trying to say to them finally land on ground that is clear enough to receive it. In the name that is above every name. Amen. Beloved, what just happened in the spiritual dimension of this moment is real, whether you felt it dramatically or quietly or not at all, in the emotional sense. God does not require your feelings to confirm His movement. He requires your willingness, and the fact that you are still here at the end of this message, having received every section of what heaven has been building toward through this entire conversation. That is willingness. That is your yes, offered imperfectly and with all the complicated weight of a real human life behind it, and that is enough for God to work with. Now let me speak to something practical, because the chosen ones who walk away from moments of genuine spiritual activation without a concrete next step are the ones who find, 3 days later, that the static has returned and the clarity is fading, and the weight they set down in the prayer has quietly climbed onto their shoulders while they were not paying attention. The theta state that was restored in your spirit tonight needs to be stewarded. The receiver that has been cleared needs to be maintained. And the 7-minute daily practice of the Genius Wave, the precisely calibrated brainwave entrainment audio that Dr. James Rivers developed through more than 30 years of neuroscientific research, is the most practical, accessible, scientifically grounded tool available to you right now for doing exactly that. $39. Through the link in the pinned comment and in the description below. With a 90-day money-back guarantee that removes every financial risk from the decision. 7 minutes every morning before the noise of the day has had the chance to rebuild the static that tonight's message cleared. That is the stewardship of what God activated in you in this moment. That is how you honor the receiver, by tending it daily rather than waiting for the next extraordinary message to restore what ordinary maintenance would have sustained. And if you are in a season where $39 represents a real sacrifice rather than a simple transaction, then hear this. The prayer that was spoken over you in this section was free. The message that found you tonight was free, and the God who authored both of them is not withholding your breakthrough pending your purchase. But if the tool is available and the barrier is not financial but simply inertia or doubt, then let this be the moment that inertia meets its end. This channel does not earn income from the platform it lives on. We are not monetized in the conventional sense. But we have chosen to keep showing up, to keep building these messages, to keep holding this space where chosen ones can be found by the frequency they were made for. Because we believe with everything in us that the ones who need this cannot afford for us to go silent. If this message has been a place where something in you was restored tonight, and you feel moved to help us keep this going, the donate link is in the pinned comment and in the description below. We are grateful for every contribution, every prayer spoken over this work, every share that carries this message to someone who is still in the static and has not yet found their way to the signal. Every act of support, regardless of its size, is partnership in something that is reaching further than any of us can currently see. Like this message, if it has moved something in you that needed to move. Not as a metric, but as an act of agreement with what heaven did here tonight. Share it with the person whose name came to your mind during the prayer, because the fact that their name arrived is not coincidence, and you already know that. Subscribe, so the next time God moves through this space, you are already positioned to receive it without having to search for it in a season when your energy may be needed for something else. You came to this message carrying a weight. You leave it carrying a word, and the word is this. Heaven is still open. Your name is still written. The frequency you were made for is still alive inside you. And the God who designed you for the assignment you have been trying to talk yourself out of for longer than you want to admit has not changed his mind about any of it. Your best chapter is not behind you. It has been waiting for the version of you that showed up tonight. And that version, the one who stayed until the end, the one who placed their hand on their chest and received a prayer they did not know they needed, the one who is reading these final words, with something quietly shifting in the place where the weight used to be. That is the version of you that the world has been waiting for. Go. The door is open, and heaven is watching you walk through it.